Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the channel, and today I'm going to be recreating another failure of history called the Grumman Nutcracker. Now, this was intended to be a vertical takeoff and landing plane concept, and unfortunately, it never got past the scale model stage. And I'm honestly surprised it even got that far, because there's so much wrong with this at its core that I'm honestly surprised it was taken seriously enough to build a scale model. So let's take a look at why this never got fully realized. Okay, so here we go. Here is an actual picture of the model that they made to demonstrate how this thing was supposed to work. And I'm gonna let you in on a little secret here. In this picture, it's not actually hovering like it's supposed to. You may not have noticed it, but there are strings holding this up in the air. So don't be fooled. They can't pull their magician tricks on me. I saw right through it from the beginning. So underneath this picture is a diagram of how this thing was supposed to look in its various forms from various angles. So you can see this thing, in order to enter into vertical takeoff and landing, was meant to hinge at its center, essentially causing the tail to rotate down by about 90 degrees, as you can see in its full transitional state here. And you may be wondering, if the tail is rotating down by 90 degrees, how is it then supposed to land or take off? Because the lowest thing in relation to the cockpit and thrust vector is not gonna be the landing gear. The landing gear gets taken over by the solid metal tail, which is probably a piece that you don't want slamming into the ground at any speed. Now, this is where things get even crazier for how this thing was intended to work. Turns out, this little picture right here, you see this wall, this 90-degree angle? This was a designated landing pad that was intended to be built specifically to allow this thing to land. They were gonna land this thing on a corner landing pad, and then the landing pad was going to rotate up underneath the plane as it folded itself back into its plane position. Now, surprisingly, there's really not a lot of information about this on the internet. I only found a handful of very, very limited information, but one of the biggest things I found, Popular Science magazine in September of 1976 had a front page feature of the Nutcracker VTOL. So you can actually see an artist rendering of what this thing might have looked like. And I only recently noticed that included in this image is the 90-degree landing pad over here, where you can actually see the hinge drawn into it where this is supposed to fold up and down. And a cool thing about this is actually there's more to the landing. It's even more complicated than just landing on this pad. The pilot was gonna have the aid of this boom arm right here, where he was intended to put the nose into this slot. It was going to latch in, and then the boom arm was gonna guide the plane onto the landing pad. And it gets even more complicated than that, but before we get there, I actually found the full magazine in Google Books. They have it. I'm gonna link this down in the description. This is the 1976 Popular Science magazine. It's got more than just this VTOL article in it, so if you want to browse some other amazing stuff for basement remodeling and home insulation and cooling and heating your home and close-ups of the new models of Ford and Chrysler in '77, you can see what technology was like back in the 70s. So fortunately, this actually is really high tech. It has a clickable index page where I can just click on the Nutcracker and it leads me right to it. So the Nutcracker VTOL folds in flight. I love this image right here. Transition. This is how it transitions. So Mr. Ben Kosafar apparently did a deep dive into the plans for this thing when it was still just an idea that had potential before their dreams were shut down by reality. And it's always fun to see how people from the past had this hopeful optimism about the future of science, because there's a sentence right over here saying that this approach for vertical takeoff and landing might even lead to a new kind of airliner. But that, if it ever happens, is in the future. Well, Ben, I don't know if you're still around this far into the future, but I'm coming from the future to tell you that VTOL airliners have not become a thing yet, so I'm very sorry. But the main thing I wanted to highlight from this magazine is this image right here. This goes into a little bit more visual detail about how this plane was intended to work. So you can see it was intended to launch in its vertical takeoff and landing formation, and then you can see it slowly transitions into its level plane formation as it flies off to mission. This is mission. We go to mission over here. It's important you know this thing was meant to accomplish missions. But this is where the craziness happens, is the landing. So you can see, like I was saying before, they have this boom arm. The nose was intended to dock within this boom arm, and then the arm lowers it onto the 90-degree landing pad. And then you can see right here, the landing pad is designated to rotate up underneath the aircraft as it straightens. And then they had an additional feature where the landing pad itself was going to essentially move around and stow the plane into a designated little hangar for it. Now, all of this was intended, the whole concept of VTOLs is intended to reduce the amount of space and resources needed to have aircrafts, because the one big thing about a plane is that it needs a really long runway in order to take off. And especially if you're out on the ocean, transporting a runway long enough, it takes a lot to do that. So if you could just have a small part of your ship designated for aircraft where they could just take off and land on a dime, that would be a huge benefit. So there was a strong motivation to innovate VTOL technology, which this was an attempt of. So here we can see another image of the model, which seems to clearly picture this guy explaining to this guy how obvious it is that the tail should not be lower than the wheels if you're gonna do vertical takeoff and landing. This guy's like, but sir, you can clearly see the tail is down here, while the wheels are up here. How is this thing supposed to land on the ground if the tail is in the way of the wheels? And this guy's face says it all. He's just like, huh. Hadn't really considered that until now. And then the project was scrapped. That's totally how it happens, 100% historically accurate. So now what blows my mind about this from the engineering perspective is they had this challenge where they wanted an airplane to have the ability to vertically take off from the ground and vertically lower itself onto the ground. And their first thought was not just, let's turn the thrusters vertical. Their first thought was, let's separate the entire tail of the plane from the front wings of the plane and have it hinge down at 90 degrees with the thrusters so that this thing can then land and take off vertically. And the funny thing about that is, after the ridiculousness of this idea was scrapped, they actually came up with an offspring of the Nutcracker, and they fittingly called it Son of Nutcracker. And this was the Son of Nutcracker. And round of applause, they figured it out. They finally decided that maybe just the thrusters should be the ones doing the turning and not half of the entire aircraft itself. But sadly, this also never made it past the design stage, so I didn't look into the issues with that. I was focusing more on this thing right here. This is the funny one. Okay, so now that I spent enough time making fun of this design, I want to thank the engineers for giving us some historical entertainment and making today's video possible. So now I want to make my own. Let's get to it. Okay, so I'm gonna come clean with you guys right now. I've actually already tried to record this video once, but for some reason, only my face cam got recorded and none of the desktop footage got recorded. So I've already built the plane and tried to fly this thing around. I'm going to share with you what I've learned about this thing, because everything I've said so far about how ridiculous of a design this thing is was only a small part of the issues this thing has. So this was one of my first iterations of this thing. You can see I've got the landing gear, I've got the thrusters, I've got wings and control surfaces, and then I have the most important part, the ability for this thing to fold 90 degrees and hinge at it around its center. The tail goes down, and the thrusters are in line with the tail. So now before I fly this thing around, I'm gonna tell you what my goal is for this. My goal is to fly up to that catwalk there, transform into the 90-degree orientation, and settle myself on the edge of the catwalk, and then use my thrusters to push myself up and straighten out onto the flat surface of the catwalk. That is my version of a successful landing, because I don't have an articulating boom arm and folding landing pad like they intended to have for this thing. So I'm gonna be doing my best with what I got. But let me show you how this thing flies. This thing actually, it's not too bad as far as actual flying goes in the plane version. That was not a vertical takeoff, as you can see. That was just a normal takeoff. But it flies great. Not too bad at all. Now watch what happens when I try to transition this thing mid-flight. Ready? Here we go. You can see it starting to fold. And instead of the tail going down, the nose goes down and just nosedives me straight into the ground, or the water in this case. So it took me a little bit to realize what's going on here. There's one really big problem. First of all, the tail fins are trying to stabilize the tail and keep it horizontal with the direction of the wind. So that's already the first problem. That causes the nose to go down a little bit. Second of all, this right here, you know what? I need to enable the time mod because I have to freeze and show you guys key points during this transition to see just to show you what is wrong with this concept. So right about here, you can see the tail is maintaining a level of flight in relation to the wind, and this is going down, which is obviously just nosing me down. But if you imagine this was the other way around and that my nose was actually level to the wind and my tail was down, we have the same issue where the plane's going in this direction and now the tail has essentially become this massive rudder that is just going against the wind that would cause us to essentially flip forward very, very quickly. So this leads me to believe that this was not intended to transition during horizontal flight. I'm not sure if they knew that and if they had planned for that, considering they never got past the scale models. But I found that the only hope for this thing to ever have a chance at not crashing mid-transition is to orient itself vertically first, and then you have to kind of not have that much velocity. And then you have to, well, okay, so we have another problem here. You can see that that didn't really work. And I forgot that there's another issue with this thing that I have to overcome first. And that is the fact that you may notice when this thing is in its folded position here, you can imagine where the center of thrust is if you look at where those thruster exhausts are pointing. And you can see, look at what it tends to do. Once this thing folds, the center of thrust is now completely misaligned with the center of mass because all of this mass has now rotated away from the thrusters. So I don't know if they accommodated that at all. I mean, looking at this picture, this seems like it's gonna have the exact same issue. The center of thrust is going right up through here, and you have all of this stuff up here and not anything over here. So this is clearly just gonna somersault through the air if nothing else is being done about this. But I looked into it because we have the issue of when you're in a hover state, you have no airflow going over your ailerons or your rudders or anything like that. So how are you supposed to actually control yourself during a hover? And it turns out this article addresses this a little bit. Apparently the Nutcracker has a precise altitude control because the jet blast goes directly over tail controls. They perform the combined functions of ailerons as well as rudder and elevator. So apparently this tail was actually responsible for all of the aerial controls when it was hovering, thanks to these thrusters pushing air over it in that hover mode. So that is actually one distinct advantage to turning the entire tail down with the thrusters versus turning just the thrusters. So Trailmakers does not have actual wind physics coming out of the thrusters that I can take advantage of like that. So I had a solution for this though. My solution was to simulate the wind forces with thrusters attached to the tails like this. So that way, when we're in our hover formation here, my tail as it goes is actually being affected by those thrusters on the tail as if there was a wind force acting on them. So that allowed me to actually get some level of control during hover mode. So if I go ahead and try to, I'm gonna see if I can do a successful transformation here. Oh, it's happening. It's happening. It is so hard to control this thing still. And now you can see those thrusters in the tail will actually allow me to pitch myself. And then I put a bunch of logic in here to also create other controls with the tail. They're still really bad. It's so hard to control because the center of thrust is not aligned. I'm trying right now. This is the best. Okay, we're done. All right, it'll be easier to show you right here. So you can see when I'm in my straightened plane mode, my roll would be controlled with my main wings there. But when I enter into this mode, there's an additional thing that happens when I press left and right. You can see the top thrusters on the tail actually turn on left and right to help push the plane and give it roll from this different orientation. And then I have the additional function of yaw, where the tail is actually going to spin like this in order to allow myself to rotate left and right in the air. As well as having this pitch function still functions exactly the same way, regardless of what orientation this is in. So that is essentially full functionality for this thing. I have all the controls, but I found out that full functionality does not equal good functionality. Because although I have control over everything, maintaining control is still an absolute nightmare. But I was fortunate enough to actually learn how to successfully transition this thing. Look at this, I'm doing it. I'm actually doing it. So now it is time. I'm going to attempt my main goal of flying this thing up to that catwalk and then landing it successfully on the corner and transitioning up onto level ground. So here we go, first attempt now. Okay. Okay, I have no, like I said, I have no idea if this was the intended method of converting into hover mode. Oh no, I lost it. It's so easy to lose it. If you don't maintain that vertical trajectory, because of the center of thrust being so misaligned, it'll just kick you out if you're not prepared. You gotta do constant adjustments to keep yourself level. All right, here we go, second try. This is, it's probably gonna take a lot of tries for me to do this. This is not an easy task. Okay, here we go. I feel like the closer I can get before oh, this is bad. This is a bad transition. Oh, come on. Tilt up, tilt, okay, no, lost it. No, completely lost it. No, I'm not even gonna restart. I'm just gonna transform back into straightened plane mode and try to just recover from that one. Here we go. Uh-oh, all right, already off to a bad start. Nope, but recovering. Oh, whoa. Oh, whoa. It was so abrupt and violent. Why? All right, this is gonna take a few tries. I'll let you know when I get there. Uh-oh. Oh, come, no! Whoa. No, that's a fail. Why did I commit to this? Oh, no, I'm getting further. Oh! I'm on. Okay. All right, now I'm just gonna push myself over. Straighten out. Okay, didn't quite work as intended. There we go. Just get up onto the thing. No, the wheel's stuck. Just come on. Why? We're here. Ready? Just get up. There we go. I'm counting it. Doesn't have to work great. It just has to work, and it worked. We caught the edge at the 90-degree transformation. We got over the edge. For some reason, I don't know why, it transitions this is how slow I programmed it to transition, but the way back, way faster. So I couldn't really do a slow transition over it. So that's the best I'm gonna get, I think. This took many, many tries. I only showed you guys the entertaining mess ups, so most of them were not entertaining. But yeah, as far as the takeoff, this thing's not really gonna be doing a vertical takeoff without a designated takeoff pad, unfortunately. But I can do that, which is kind of cool. So from personal experience, I can now say I understand why this thing never got past the design phase. I am very grateful that no pilot had to deal with the nightmare that is this thing to fly. If you enjoyed this recreation of a historical failure, you'll probably enjoy some of the other ones I've done that you can find in this playlist I put together right here on the end screen. Leave some suggestions for some other crazy real-life machines or mechanisms that you'd like to see me try to recreate in a video game. Hope this video has earned your subscription. Anyway, this has been ScrapMan, and I'll see you next time. Bye.